executives representing a diverse part of the industry that want to talk to you about what diversity means to them in their organizations. I wanted to introduce your moderator today. This is Michelle Ford-White. And Michelle is Vice President, Talent Acquisitions and Campus Relations for NBC Universal. I had the great pleasure of meeting Michelle a few years ago when I was with the Cable Center and we were starting working on a big conference like this, and she was so gracious and helped us with, I think, like a career booth. She had a team come and set up a career booth and talk to all of the students. So I know where her passion lies, and it's with you. So she's going to be leading the conversation today and introducing all of her members, these fabulous, lovely faces next to me. So get your questions ready. If you want to read about bios, they're on the ODI website. But get your questions ready, okay? Because the 15 minutes is going to go by very quickly. And please welcome Michelle Ford-White from NBC Universal.
I'm thrilled to be here today, gorgeous fall day in New York. I was actually on a panel yesterday in Washington, D.C. at Howard University, and the moderator had literally an egg timer. And if you were going too long, it would buzz. It was like being played off the Oscars. So I'm going to be a little more subtle than that today. I will be keeping track with Dolly or whomever to make sure we have time for all of your great questions at the end, because you have such a fantastic panel there in front of you. So to start out, diversity in media, building a level playing field. I'm probably preaching to the choir a bit, but I thought it would be interesting to start with just a few facts about the reality of why diversity is so important in the workplace. So a diverse workforce drives economic growth. There was a McKinsey study that looked at that, finding that when you have a higher percentage of women in the workplace, it affects the overall GDP, which certainly makes sense. Diverse workforces capture a greater share of the consumer market. So if you bring together into the workplace folks from a diverse background, obviously as they try to market to people of diverse backgrounds for products, goods, in my universe, content, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Something near and dear to me, recruiting, because I'm responsible for recruiting at NBC Universal. So recruiting for a diverse workforce means that your candidates are coming with a wider range of candidates. Those of us that live in the recruiting space talk about the war for talent a lot, and the fact that there's so much competition, especially in certain areas. So you really limit yourself if you're not very strategic, not just in being inclusive about diversity, but being very focused on attracting diverse candidates. And then last but not least, diversity fosters a more creative and innovative workplace. We're talking about media. Obviously, media is all about ideas and innovation and creativity. And when people come back from home, from churches, from sororities, from their family and friends, they're coming in and saying, hey, this is what's happening in my house, this is how we perceive this is what we thought about, this is what's important to us. And having been in editorial rooms, there's nothing more important than having that diverse background in the room. So with that, I want to start off. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. They probably can do it best. And just tell you their titles, and then if you could talk a little bit about your own journey. Our internship program at NBCU is called Campus to Career, and so if you could tell a little bit about your campus to career transition as we start out, I think the students would all find that really useful. So we know each other pretty well.
Absolutely.
If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Rasan Harris, President and CEO of the Emma Bowen Foundation. The Emma Bowen Foundation creates a pathway for students of color to have thriving careers within the media industry. My pathway to careers was one that was really built off of understanding who I was as a person of color and being nurtured by my community that I grew up in, which is in central New Jersey. My parents really wanted to make sure that I had pride and understood who I was, I guess in my church community, in the community groups that my parents worked in, but also made sure that I showed up in very diverse settings and was able to feel confident and be an ambassador to work across groups. So I went to Princeton University, decided that one of the things about working across groups that I really wanted to do is I wanted to learn Spanish. So even though I'm traditionally African American, yo fui al Cuerpo de Paz in Uruguay. So I went down to the Peace Corps in Uruguay, got to work with the community, but also got to get those cross-cultural and language skills. Came back and started working in nonprofits, and that eventually led me into philanthropy, making grants at an international foundation that make grants in children, youth, aging, health, and human rights. And one of the things about philanthropy, even though it was a $4 billion foundation, they recognized that that was just a drop in a bucket compared to the money that's in markets that governments control. So there were two areas. They wanted to be able to change policy. By changing policy, we were able to influence those billions and trillions of dollars that move in markets or within government, or changing hearts and minds. And one of the ways to change hearts and minds is by capturing people's imagination. And media is a great place for that. So after working in philanthropy, I got the opportunity to run the Emma Bowen Foundation that takes rising freshmen, and rising sophomores in college and gets them year after year internships at some of the most powerful media companies in the country and in the world. I understood that there was a connection by working at the Emma Bowen Foundation, by integrating diverse perspectives and diverse people into the messages that were going on. That was a way to, on a mass, affect hearts and minds and hopefully we can make a positive change in the world. So that's how I got from philanthropy into media, and the Emma Bowen Foundation is really a bridge, I think, between community and these great corporations, for finding those that have a commitment to diversity and innovation and finding new ideas, to figure out how we can give them the talent that will help them thrive into the future. So not just diversity because it's the nice thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do, and ultimately it's a just thing to do, that you're doing good by doing well.
Great. Thank you. Dawn?
All right, that's hard to follow up.
I should have started at the other end. I apologize. We have a closer. We'll keep that in mind as we go through.
My name is Dawn Holiday Mack. I'm from El Rey Network. El Rey Network was launched nationally in February of 2014. And the way it originated, it was one of the 4 networks that was granted carriage by the Comcast merger. So they had an agreement with all of the African American and Hispanic communities to ensure that they would support independent networks that were minority owned and minority targeted. So El Rey was one of those. So we won that award. I'm proud to say that as of today, we're in over 40 million homes. We're carried on all of the top MVPDs. So we have Comcast, Time Warner Cable, DirecTV, and Dish Network, along with Charter. And hopefully we'll be able to announce more next year. My personal journey, I was a film production graduate at the University of Southern California. And what was interesting to me at the time, I think our class was maybe 40, and there were maybe 4 minority students in the program. And I won't date myself, but that was a while ago. And when I came out, especially as a black female, I went and tried to get a job. And it was really interesting because the interview would be over as soon as I went through the door. Like Dawn Holiday, they don't really know what you are, and they couldn't find out when I talked to them on the phone, but they would find out quickly, and I would know that I wouldn't get that job. I still wanted to be in media and entertainment, so I decided instead of trying to take the creative track, I would focus on the business side. Because I would recommend, even if someone is interested in pursuing the creative side, you always want to know about the other side of the business, because that's ultimately where the decision making is going to happen. So I went to Yale and got an MBA, and decided that I wanted to come back. And my first job out in LA was for a TV producer, and I did development. And it was very interesting, but it wasn't my passion. And so I went to Creative Artists Agency, one of the top talent representation agencies, and worked on their business development side. And that's really where I found my groove. And today, my focus is on consumer insights and understanding audience strategy. What I love about my position at El Rey Network is that I think when I came out, the audience shift had not occurred yet. And so studios, networks, companies were really not listening to the black and brown audience. and understanding was critical to the success. We didn't have Fast and Furious. We didn't have Empire. We didn't have Shonda Rhimes. And now what I love about it is that I have the ability at El Rey Network to impact the change that I did not see when I came out of school. And I do not want the same person to have the experience I had coming out of college. So I really love participating in events like this because I think it's critical that you know that you now have advocates. You have advocates on the studio and network side. You have advocates like the Immersion Foundation. And it's critical to really reach out and to never give up. Because I think right now it's a great time to come out and to get into media entertainment because I believe the industry is starting to wake up. And that's a really good thing.
So before we move on, quick pop quiz. She mentioned Comcast and a merger. Does anyone know the company that Comcast acquired? Yes.
Charter.
No.
Verizon?
No. Hint, I just introduced
Yeah,
you.
like, isn't it NBC?
It is Universal. It's going to start doing like this. It's kind of hard letters.
So you probably tried
I bring that up because I think, you guys have a fantastic advantage that old folks like me who went to school before the interweb did not have. And that is in your hand is all the information you need. So I'll kind of pepper things throughout, but make sure that you're not just consumers of media if you're interested, that you study the business. You can easily have Google alerts, right, of certain businesses you're interested in. If you're going to sit in front of someone, make sure you understand the full picture. So you give yourself a great advantage at career fairs, at opportunities like this, if you know what you're walking up to. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, with that, that's the lecture du jour. I apologize for this. So next we have Immersion.
Yes. So my story is somewhat similar to yours, actually. I grew up in Southern California, and I went to UCLA, so across town. And I applied to go to school here at NYU because my dad is alumni at NYU, but I didn't get in. I was applying to go into the film school to be a filmmaker, and I wanted to be the next Spike Lee. And that didn't transpire because I didn't apply the right way, so I didn't get in. And through circumstance, I ended up at UCLA, and one of my mentors gave me the advice that it's good to be creative, but a lot of that's intuitive, and what you should really learn is the business. And if you want to have an impact in this industry, we need people of color behind the scenes who are making decisions to make things happen. So I got into the communications study program, and we had a club called African Americans in Communications on campus. And one thing I encourage you is if you're on campus, try to make the most of your experience on campus and try to create your own path. And so what we did in our small club was we invited people who worked in the industry, and being in Los Angeles, we had access to a lot of people nearby. We would have them come and speak to us about their careers, and it was a great networking opportunity for all of us. And through that, I learned about an organization called NAMIC, which is the National Association of Multi-Ethnicity Communications. And it's a big platform for this industry for advocating diversity. And so through my experience in NAMIC, I started to meet people who I didn't know down the road would end up helping me in my career. So after I graduated, it was a similar situation. I would apply for jobs, and my name is Emery Russell Walton III. So
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so this is before the internet, mind you, LinkedIn. So you mail in your resume. I think I was emailing you my resume. So they see my name, and I think when I walked in, I mean, people, their faces tell on them. It's like your similar situation. You walk in, they're like, "Oh, you're Emery?" I'm like, "Yes." So that was part of the challenge that I felt, that when you go in and you feel like, is this interview over before it has even started? So I applied for a while, and then I eventually ended up applying at A&E Networks, where I work today. And when I applied at A&E, I did have on my resume Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is my fraternity, and I also had NAMIC. And so a woman who was working in our office in LA, her cousin was an Alpha, and she was involved in NAMIC. And so when she got my resume, she called me, And when I came in, she said, I know exactly who you were. And she had asked around, she talked to people in NAMIC about my participation, and she's like, we want you here, we're going to see how we can get you to have a job here. So from that, I started my career as an assistant in distribution, and I have been at A&E now for 16 some years, and I'm now the vice president of distribution. And it's a little rare to stay at one place, I think, for this tenure in your career. But the thing about our company was when I joined A&E, we only had 4 networks. And now we're up to 11. We merged with Lifetime Networks back in 2010. We continue to launch new services. We've gone into digital. So while maybe the name on my check has stayed the same, the job has completely evolved and changed. And I went back and got my MBA back in 2010 because one of my bosses encouraged me, in order to be relevant, you need to, have that next level. You want to be in a leadership role. And being a leader is very important because, again, we need people to continue to open the doors like people open the doors for me. And so that was very important, and I got my MBA, and now I oversee distribution in the Caribbean territory. I also work with some of our new over-the-top endeavors. Are you guys familiar with over-the-top? Or is that a pop quiz?
That's a little tougher, you should just tell.
So getting your content over the internet through different streaming platforms. And then I also still work with the traditional distributors such as the Comcast and Charter Communications.
Great, fantastic. Hi guys, I'm Patricia. I work at NBC Digital Enterprises. All I do is over the top, so you're going to be hearing a lot of subscription video on demand. It's like a Netflix or a Hulu. So I am from South America. I'm actually from Uruguay. Which is like the tiniest country in South America, which is crazy. So I grew up in South America, and then my formative years were Miami, which is pretty much a South American country. And then I went to the whitest state in America, Vermont, and I got my undergrad in Middlebury, Vermont, and it was the first time I had ever experienced being part of a minority. So I was one of 12 students of color. And I'll never forget, I got a welcome student of color, kind of pamphlet, and I went to the woman in the mailroom, and I was like, I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. And she looked me up, and she was like, nope, you're a student of color, which was very odd for me because always being surrounded by Latinos, I'd never been in the minority, so that was an interesting experience. And then after Middlebury, I was like, get me out of the States, and I moved to Spain. And so I lived there for a while. Turns out, just speaking Spanish, you can't get a job in Barcelona, you have to speak Catalan, which I don't. So I ended up moving back to Boston, worked for a great company that put trips together for high school kids to go abroad, since I lived all over the world. And then ended up moving to San Francisco just because it was the .com craze during like 98, 99, 2000. Worked for a startup, worked for Excite at Home. Ended up moving back to Philly. This is a long, drawn-out story. Back to Philly, and worked for Comcast for a bit. Started my own jewelry company, sassyjewels.com. And then...
I'll be looking that up in about 30 minutes.
And then got to a level very similarly where everyone was speaking this language, right? And there was this language that I couldn't really speak, and that is the language of business. So came back to New York and got my MBA at Columbia. After Columbia, worked at HBO for 5 years, then moved to Santa Monica for Hulu. Worked for Hulu for 4 years, really when it was starting to get off the ground back in the day. Went to a little startup, moved back to New York to be the CMO of Shazam, and I am now at NBC.
So one thing that I think you can hear so far as a common denominator is really respecting and understanding the business side of the business, that it is a business. A little bit about myself. I was a Howard University grad. I was a broadcast journalist in nature. Again, at the time, I knew I wanted to be in the editorial space, so that business stuff had nothing to do with me. Certainly have had to evolve on that throughout my career to really understand the importance of that. So I spent about 16 years as a journalist, mostly producing for network news, CBS News, was in their investigative unit in Washington, D.C. NBC. I spent a long time at Good Morning America as a producer and senior producer. Did a stint in Chicago with the Oprah Winfrey Show, which, regardless of anything else, is the one thing people always ask about on my resume. And so after about 16 years on the content side, really wanted to take a step back and understand the business more. And the route that I took was talent. And so I began at home at ABC News, and will tell you as you go throughout your career, if you decide you want to shift and transition, it's easiest to do that at home. So this was somewhere I'd been for a long time, was a known quantity, and they were willing to take a chance on me. So I started looking for on-air talent, knowing that this meteorologist was probably not going to resign in 4 years. Who do we need to start to bring in and build up now? Who are we looking at from local stations that we can bring in potentially as network talent? Looked a lot of bad reels, bad hair and bad makeup. And then dug in on the producer side, so I wanted to understand how can we really train and develop and give business acumen to our creative team, who kind of get promoted out of their skill set at some point when all of a sudden they're responsible for a P&L and responsible for leading people. And then I came to NBC Universal about 4 years ago, and today I'm responsible for all of our internships. So NBCUoncampus.com, I cannot resist, I apologize, to find out about lots of great internships opportunities. And also for all of our hiring through our vice president level. So we hired about 3,500 full-time and about 1,700 positions last year for interns. So that's a little bit of mine. So like you've been a lot of places. There certainly is fantastic value in staying somewhere for a long time throughout your career and growing up in an organization. There's a different type of value in having that, different portfolio. So for the sake of time, I want to dig in here. Let's talk about diversity itself. The word gets used a lot. And people have assumptions about what diversity means. When you each talk about diversity in the workplace, or what having an inclusive workplace means, can you just share a little bit, anyone can jump in, about what that means to you personally?
So when I think about diversity, I think at its core, it's discomfort, really. Because if you think about diversity, it's a range or spectrum of differences. And as human beings, we naturally gravitate towards things or experiences or people that are like us. Right? That's just the lens of which we kind of view the world. It's very familiar. And I was confronted kind of in the opposite way at Middlebury, where everyone else looked the same, and I was different. And so I think what I would say is, especially in the workforce, I try to surround myself early on. A mentor once told me, you guys especially, because the fact that you're even here is just remarkable, and so you are going to be the leaders of these companies. You will be. So as you're building your teams, think about fighting against that, seeking the discomfort, walking towards the discomfort, as opposed to hiring people that look like you or talk like you and have a shared experience, because that is ultimately how we learn how to grow, and those types of people can augment your skill set, and you're just going to have a better experience and work product for it.
I would agree with you. I like diversity because it does make you feel uncomfortable, because other people may not share your opinion. But at the end of the day, to me, you come up with the best solutions when you have a diverse team, because everybody's looking at it from different angles. And it can be diversity of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, but that just enriches the workforce, and that's what I found. I mean, personally, before we launched Elray Network, I was at Factory Made, which was the company that partnered with Robert Rodriguez to do Elray Network. On our core team, we had someone who was Jewish, someone who was Filipino, me, someone who was East Asian, someone who was white, someone who was Latino, and you could tell, we would have lots of arguments in the middle of the room, and everyone was uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, that final solution was far better than any one of our individual propositions. And I would say that's to that credit, to that diversity, I think that shows in our final product with Elray.
There's a Harvard Business Review's case study on the shuttle Columbia that took off, and there was a piece of foam, I think, that fell off one of the fuel tanks that came off, and it hit the outside of the shuttle, and then there was a debate about whether that was going to be a big deal or not on the entry. Well, most of you way too young to have been alive when it happened, but when it came in re-entry, it disintegrated and everyone died. And in the case study, they talk about what were the factors that really caused them to make the wrong decision, even though they had some of the smartest people in the world at NASA all trying to analyze what happened. And it's a case study really about groupthink. So when you're in a group, when everyone kind of has the same approach, the same heuristics of approaching a problem, you can be extremely smart, but if no one kind of brings ideas from the outside, or if you're scared to bring ideas from the outside, you can all end up with a solution that seems comfortable, but can be very wrong and catastrophic. And so when I think about diversity, it's a discomfort, it's bringing in people that have these different opinions that can have you analyze a situation differently. And that can be on race, that can be on gender, sexual orientation, religion. And I think that's really important. And then you're looking for a place to work, you want to hopefully find a place that embraces that kind of interaction, because I think that leads to innovation and success and growth. For the Emma Bowen Foundation, our view, not primary lens, but the lens that we are leading first with is racial and ethnic diversity, because the Emma Bowen Foundation was created because Emma, who was an advocate in the 60s and 70s and going to the 80s, recognized the way people of color were represented in the news was really, really negative. Every image you saw was someone who's a thief or lazy or what have you, and recognized that there are people of color that are doctors and saving folks and great business people, and wanted to make sure that there were more images in front of the camera that changed it. And so I don't think one sense of diversity is more important than other, but it's really important to understand what you're bringing to the table and also how people react to it, because there were a lot of conversations here about when I showed up, I wasn't what they expected and they rejected me outright. So being prepared in those situations of how you're going to deal with it, not necessarily in a negative way per se, but how you can kind of hack around the problem to get to the solution so that you can have the kind of impact that you want to with your career and where you're working.
Yeah, and I'll just add, for me, diversity really, I look at it as two things, as being about respect, so respecting other people and also respecting yourself, and also representation. And knowing that when you're in your role, your organizations, there might be the situations where you find yourself being the only everyone here is individual and unique, so you always be the only you in the room, but you might be the only one with a certain perspective or experience that you're bringing into a room, and you need to be confident in representing that. And that's something that I've done in my company that's been very beneficial to my career path, and then it's helped me encourage others to do that as well. And our company has launched a lot of diversity initiatives. We even launched a Hispanic network, because I'm Puerto Rican as well. So I have Puerto Rican. So when I started, we had History Channel, and one thing, probably about 2000, I said, Latino history is very important. It's very big, it's very enriching, and we weren't really addressing that in the marketplace. And I went and spoke to our president of our division, and I said, it'd be great if we could do an SAP feed of our network. And he looked at me and he said, let's do something bigger than that. We're actually talking about, we're going to do a full network, because we just launched a joint venture in Latin America. And because I spoke up, he's like, I want you to be part of the team that's going to help put this network together. And so that was my opportunity to represent, and then also go in and help, because the people who were starting to put the network together didn't quite have maybe the experiences that I was familiar with, and they had to bring in people from different backgrounds, from Hispanic background, cultures, from a diverse range in order to build a network and to create something that was authentic to the audience that we're trying to reach.
That's a fantastic example also of speaking up, right?
Yeah.
If you see something, say something.
Absolutely, yes.
Even if it feels like the right thing to do, sometimes there's even broader business implications if someone's smart enough to see it. So that's a great story. So give me some examples. We've sort of started to pepper it, but how has, whether it's affinity groups, PRGs, organizations, what are some of the tools that you have found useful as you've navigated your career? Or what are some of the business platforms that are happening in your organization that you think really influence and expose diversity?
Well, I mentioned earlier naming, and I really, again, they have a strong presence here in New York City, and they're, very active organization. They have an annual conference here, and that's been a great platform for networking, for advocating. They actually do an annual survey that they partner with WIC, which is another great organization, Women in Cable and Telecommunications, and they partner and they do an annual survey of how the cable industry is doing as far as diversity hiring, and not just at lower level positions, about higher level, senior executive level. And so they continue to inform the industry. They also have a platform for employees in different companies to come together and to move things forward across the industry. So that's my pitch for me.
I think the employee resource groups, the ERGs, are really important. So if you go to an organization as a new person or as an intern or what have you, showing up and figuring out what the LGBTQ group is talking about, or figuring out what the African American or the Latino group is, because those are folks that can be a built-in resource of navigating the organization and understanding the business and understanding the culture. And from my standpoint, the Emma Bowen Foundation, if you get an internship that's through an organization, looking at that organization and the cohort that you're there with as a resource to help you to navigate what's going on is fantastic. So if you can get into an organization through another organization that provides supports, it's a way to reach out to their alumni, to reach out to their staff, to kind of help you learn the things that you need to be successful in your company.
I would echo that, and the importance of the advocacy groups also leads you to resources. Like, there's two things. One, you have the ability to, for many of these organizations, to actually speak with some of your future bosses and people, your future colleagues, and you don't get that if you are applying just as a resume, cold, like over the internet. They don't know you. You get FaceTime with a lot of these programs, which is very, very important. And the second piece is that they will know all of the different resources. There actually are quite a few diversity programs in place. Part of the problem is not a lot of people know that they exist. So some of those groups really help because they're your front line, right? They're your biggest advocates, but they also are your biggest source of information.
And I want to point out that that was one of the parts of Henry's story, if you missed it. Alpha Phi Alpha naming is what helped get him through the door, and people knew what kind of person he was just based off of who he was associated with.
And then once you get in there, you got to show up.
Yeah.
You got to see the door, and you got to participate, and you got to work, and then you got to make your own ways.
So that's a great, thank you for the layup there. So that really takes me to what I want to talk about next. So certainly from a culture standpoint, if you have an opportunity to choose the type of organization that you associate yourself with, and it's clear to you from what you see on screen and behind the screen, you could research ERGs that they may have. Does everyone know what ERGs are? Just in context, so employee resource groups, some companies call them affinity groups. Those are groups that are organized typically through a corporate diversity program that allow, whether it's African American, Latino, different communities to gather on the premises of the company. They do leadership training, they do business development, they celebrate different cultures throughout the year. So depending on the organization, they may look different, but a couple of folks have referenced ERGs, so I wanted to make sure you guys knew what they were. But you may not have, when you're looking for that first job, you just need a check, right? You may not have the luxury of saying, gee, if this company doesn't have ERGs, I'm not going to take this production assistant job. So when you get in the door, and I think most of us have walked in a door before and been like, so it's just me, okay, what's next? How do you navigate that? How do you find resources and mentors once you get in the door for that first opportunity?
I think part of it, is like my story is from speaking up. Our company didn't have an ERG at A&E Networks until about 6 months ago, and it started probably just a year ago. Was we were doing the Aaliyah movie on Lifetime, and they announced it in a company meeting, and I said, who's making this movie? Because I knew the executives. There was no one of color who was on the programming team. So I was thinking, what do they know about Aaliyah? so I went up to the head of program and said, who's making this movie? And she says, you know about Aaliyah? And I said, yeah. She said, great. Come to my office.
So do not tweet that.
Oh, yeah.
This is Vegas.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I should have started that at the beginning.
Thank you for, turn the camera. So anyway, long story short, I got involved, helped pick the music for the for the movie, for the film, and the movie still took on a life of its own. But out of that, the company said, it'd be great to have people who are not day-to-day working in program creative, but have a story to tell or understand the stories that we're telling to help with the process. And so they created a group that we're the insights team in our company, and it's made from people from various backgrounds. And what we do is we help with that content and programming. And our company is not new to us because for history, we actually had a group of historians who vet the historical accuracy of the programming. But we didn't think about, for other brands, who's vetting the cultural accuracy, in the content that we're doing. And so this is a group now that has, come out of that experience, and I think it's, it's been great. And so again, it's an opportunity. If it's not there when you arrive at the company, find out ways how you can, speak up and create change, and actually can be a greater opportunity for you as well.
I think that's a great point, because if you decide to not go to an established company, if you decide to go to a smaller company, more of a startup. When I first joined Hulu, we were only 150 people, and it's a tech company, so there were very, very few women. And so I would encourage all of you to kind of seek out, introduce yourself and go out to coffee and just ask questions. How did, what's your path? How did you get here? What are the things that I should avoid? What are the, just give me some advice. And so in doing that, I think we formed an informal kind of female in tech group. And over the years, it just became a little bit more formalized. Turns out, fast forward, I was there 4 years. 4 years, I was pregnant with my third, and I was about to take maternity leave, and I'd been through this before, so I know what maternity leave should be. And it turns out they had a shit maternity leave policy. It was horrid because of the 500 employees, there were only 2 women who had ever had babies. So then it was like, okay, well, I'm not going to get penalized for giving birth, so straight into the CEO's office, and I said, you preach a culture of builders, and you preach this culture of, of employees first, and then live it. And I showed him, I photocopied the maternity leave policy, and he was mortified because he had never seen it. Why would he? So we ended up changing the maternity leave policy to be obviously better. And when I left, what was great is that exactly what Emery said is you don't even realize in having these conversations, and they're very informal when you leave, it actually was a formal group within, HR had made it very, very much like put a stamp on it. And so now it is something that they use to recruit women at Hulu and in tech because they're so little. So
I think you both raised a really good point in that I know we spoke earlier about our experiences where it seemed like overt racism, but what I have found is that there are a lot of decisions that are made, and it isn't necessarily like meant to be negative, or they were thinking. It's mainly because you have people that have never considered it. It's like your male CEO. How would he ever know about maternity leave? And that it's important to recognize that, because your input will be valuable in these organizations. They're looking for things like that. And both of your examples when you spoke up, company policies have changed.
So the one thing I want to add before we get to questions is from a level set standpoint. So if you're coming in and it's your first job out of school, are you marching into that CEO's office, right? So I want to kind of level set this. How do you navigate your passion, your personal interests, what's important to you from a culture perspective, and it's your very first job? Maybe you're someone's assistant, maybe you're a production assistant. Talk to me a little bit about that and about how mentoring and mentors play into that.
I was just about to say that mentors are really, really vital because they will help you navigate what's happening there, and they will let you know the appropriate channels of getting things through the pipeline, and not necessarily go in there very inappropriately and get your head chopped off right away. So you want to be have a way to be diplomatic. You want to understand basically the risks and benefits of every decision that you have. And if you decide to take a risk, and go out there, at least you should know like the positive and the negative of each decision that you make. And I think mentors and bouncing ideas off of folks is extremely helpful in doing that. And you know, when you get to a point where you're senior enough and folks really respect your opinion, it's easy to walk in a CEO's office, but there might be a way that someone who's mentoring you that can help get you the meeting or get your feedback through in a way that will be heard, as opposed to someone not hearing you because you're young or you're a person of color or that you're gay or whatever, that doesn't fit their paradigm of understanding how they can take in the information.
I would say that one of the first things you want to do is research. Know everything about that company that you can. Know who all of the key executives are. Know what their projects are. There was a colleague, actually, he mentioned when he first started out, and I think it was a brilliant idea. He made a card, like he researched all of the talent agencies. He knew all the key agents. He knew all of their talents. He knew all the projects that were being developed. And he put them on index cards. And those are the things that he would study day and every single day. What would happen from that is that he would then recognize faces. And I think LinkedIn is brilliant for this because you actually can associate the face.
Are you all on LinkedIn? Yeah. Okay, fantastic.
But that helps, and then when you have the dialogue and you have the informational meetings, you can start contributing. People will start listening to you. People will take notice, and it'll be a lot easier too to figure out who your mentor should be, who you want to approach, and who is approachable.
Great. Just one last thing on mentors. Don't assume mentors will look like you. I have found that just because of proximity in the workplace, there weren't a lot of folks typically that looked like me above my head, and some of my best mentors did not look like me at all. So as you're starting out, gravitate towards people that showed interest in you as well, and you might be surprised at those opportunities. So we have a few minutes left. I want to get a couple of questions in. Are there questions? And if you could stand up and tell us your name and your major and where you go to school, that would be great.
Good morning. My name is Reyes Tankard. I go to St. John's University. And my question is, in terms of respective corporations, how has the international demographic contributed to your respective departments? You understand where I'm coming from?
I mean, we have an international business. So our company, 80 Networks, our networks are in 80 countries around the world. And we have joint venture partnerships, and we also own some of our business. So we're producing, creating content, and distributing networks internationally. And I cover our Caribbean territory, which is a subset of our international group as well for our business. So there's a lot of opportunity there and exchange. The benefits of doing that is we do discover some new programming content opportunities from those other markets as well that we work with.
Okay. Hi, my name's Liliana. I'm a junior here at PACE. I'm a double major in entertainment management and quantitative business analysis. And my question really is, I'm Latina, but I am very light skinned, so people don't assume I'm Latina. So they make very inappropriate comments about Latinas in front of me. So how do you kind of address the microaggressions that you kind of experience in the workplace that people don't really assume about you?
That's an awesome question. I can't tell you how many times I'm out to dinner and I say, I don't eat spicy food, and they're like, what do you mean you don't eat spicy food? All the time. All the time. And I'm like, well, and so for years I actually didn't say anything because, again, I think it goes back to really understanding your environment, your audience, and maybe it's something that just comes with age where you stop caring as much. But now I'll just be like, in South America we eat meat and potatoes. Maybe you're thinking of Mexico. So I get it, and I try. I mean, man, every time I go to like a Latino group, I often get, why do you speak white? Where's your accent? And I work really hard to speak like this. Like my first language is Spanish, and so it forces you to choose, and you don't feel like you ever have to choose in terms of like where you belong. And then I would say just whenever you feel comfortable, like speak up, and yeah, just own it because it just educate people.
And for tools on that, you should look up unconscious bias. Look up unconscious bias. There's a lot of research going on that gives tools on how you handle microaggressions in those types of situations.
Question in the back.
Hi.
My name is Rob Marciano. I'm a management major and a sophomore here at University. My question is, you guys talked about how when you guys were going into like when you were starting out, it was something you didn't know because project and stuff like that. My question is, how did you guys? Was it hard to stay motivated, and how did you guys stay motivated moving forward in your career?
I think one of the most important things, and I think especially minority students, you do have to develop thick skin, right? And you can't just give up. You have to be focused with your passion. And just because, think of a writer who probably has to make 8,000 pitches before someone takes a look at their script. That's the nature of the business, and being a minority in the business is no different. Don't give up. And certainly, one thing I think that isn't in place, that is in place now that I didn't have access to, were these amazing advocacy groups, right? So they can increase your chances of those occurring. I won't say that they'll never occur, but hopefully in 2015 they'll happen a lot less.
Great, a couple more questions, yes.
My name is Danielle. I graduated, so I'm an alumni, but my major was international management with a concentration in the arts and entertainment. My question is, to find a mentor, you think it's really important to establish connections, but how would you go about that? If you don't have anyone in the media industry per se, and LinkedIn is very important, how would you be able to reach out to them if you've done your research on the company, you know where they work and what they do, in a way where they were not so aggressive, but kind of to open up a conversation so they can mentor you?
So go ahead.
No, one thing is mentoring is a two-way street, and if you go asking someone, what can you give me? I want you to mentor, just pour into me. They don't know what they get out of it. So mentoring relationships should be one in which it's clear to them how they benefit from it, and by understanding who they are and what's important to them, then hopefully in your pitch to be, the mentor, that they understand how it's mutually beneficial. So that's one of the things. And then it goes back to a lot of these employee resource groups or advocacy organizations, getting involved in volunteering. There are a lot of opportunities to do that where you can meet people. So for example, Diversity Week just happened for cable and telecommunications industry out here in New York City. The Walter Pates Foundation had a dinner and they needed people to co-check. So people were volunteers, there were college students and recent graduates that were there, but they were also able to meet some of the most powerful people in the industry too, just by volunteering and being involved in those groups.
I think the other thing on mentoring is sometimes we have this romantic notion of this Yoda that will follow us with cryptic throughout our lives, and that's not necessarily the case. So think of it more like a board of directors, right? There are moms I talk to who've been mommies longer than me, who help me figure out the working mommy juggle. There are people of color that I have very different types of conversations with in the business. There are people who are above me in terms of rank where I am now that offer a different type of coaching. So I think if you take away kind of that pressure, I have to find the one, and how that can flux throughout your career and where you'll have different opportunities to meet people. But make sure it's that FaceTime opportunity, I think, is really key. It's tough to go on LinkedIn and find someone's title and say, hey, will you be my mentor? I've had mentors who were at the same level as I was. When I first started off, there was this production assistant that was kick-ass, and she got to go everywhere, and I was like, Amy's gonna be my girl. Instead of hating, I'm getting Amy a coffee, because she gets to go in rooms I can't go in for some reason. And she looked a little more like Malibu Barbie than me, and I was like, I'm down with Amy. What's Amy know? And so, kind of broaden your scope of what you think of as mentors as well. Yes, last question.
Okay, so kind of piggybacking off what a lot of people said in the room, I feel like I've run across a few different instances where you all spoke about kind of getting your foot in the door and networking. It's hard for me kind of to put all of it together and figure out how to get past that, because I've had instances where I have walked in and they see me. My name is Taj Pinnell, I guess. I'm actually a little farther along. I'm an MBA student here in my marketing management, strategic management, double major there. But I've instances where I walk in and I instantly know, okay, they didn't know who I was over the phone or what have you, and now I'm here and I look like this. So that's kind of out the window, where I have instances where I try to reach out to people where I've met people networking, and it seems like you're having a really good conversation, and they say, oh, keep in touch, and then you reach out, and it's like a black hole, and no one ever responds to you again. And I feel kind of defeated in that sense, where I'm like, well, how do I get my foot in the door, because I feel like I go to these events, I meet the right people, and then it's always a dead end. Or when I'm applying in my resume, I do applying to LinkedIn because I feel like going through corporate portals are always like a black hole for me too. People tell me maybe my name is one of those things, and then I think about, do I need to start changing my name on resumes, or how do I, what's really the trick to get in there and stay in there? Because I feel like I can come across an instance where I find someone who might be good, and hey, I would like to get to know you, let's go for coffee, this, that, and the third, but then at the end of the day, they end up being intimidated by, I guess, the way that I carry myself, and how that, the power that I have, or where I see myself going in the future, and the drive that I have towards that, it always ends up putting me back in a situation where I'm just like, all right, I'm back at square one. I feel like I always end up back at square one. How do you, like,
So I'm going to give you a challenge.
Yes.
I want you to link with me on LinkedIn. I want you to send me what you typically send people as a note. I want there to be an offer in there. We talked about asking and offering. I will tell you, as someone that's like almost 6 feet tall and looks at the top of people's heads and looks like this, learning how to diffuse intimidation is really important. It's a great skill. It is not impossible. It does not cause your hair or your name tag to change. And all rooms are not like that. So that is your challenge. Okay. Anyone want to add any in terms of insight for the group on that?
I think you nailed it. And going back to something that Emery said too, is join some of these groups and show up. And so it's not just your presentation in the letter you send, it's your body of work. I see Taj all the time, and she's always leading this, and I see how she leads and manages people. I saw how she produced this video. I see how she kept the finances together for this event, and then that becomes how you're known, and your relationships become much more important than your resume.
Yeah, plant those seeds, because you can't just show up to someone and say, hey, I need this from you, can you do this for me? I want this favor. You want to build a reputation for yourself and a rapport with people. And so you need to invest and plant your seeds and spend time. And then eventually when you see those opportunities that come around, they know you, and you're someone who comes to mind for them when you're looking for those opportunities.
And I would say too that some of the ladies that have gone cold, I don't know how you have recontacted, and I'm not saying stalk, but sometimes, I mean, right, I could get 200 emails.
Yeah.
Amen.
And it's not, and I'm not trying to ignore anyone. And so just make sure that you recontact. But when you recontact with a purpose. Hey, I want to follow up, I want to let you know what's going on. Maybe you feel you finished a project, or just have that reason and have that touch point.
That's right. The ball is in your court. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, I was on a panel in another state yesterday in a room like this. I know you all the time are traveling around the country. So there's a competitive edge to this, where you've got to be the one that gets through with the other 200 people that also want to connect, and it's on you to follow up, it's on you to make them interested in you. And there are ways to do that, but you have to realize that just like putting your resume in a job portal, you're competing against a lot of people to establish that business mentorship if you don't already have a relationship. It's not impossible. All right, with that, thank you all so much. Let's give up.